want your soul.
My name is Tom Smith. Until the events I'm going to talk about happened, I was just an average guy. I'm a white male living near a major city on the East Coast of the United States, and I'm 30 years old. I have an average name, am of average height, average weight, and have no distinguishing marks such as scars or tattoos, not even so much as a freckle. My hair and eyes are brown, and my face is pretty unremarkable. When I was single, I rented an average house in an average suburban neighborhood, drove an average car of average color, and worked an average 9-to-5 office job. My life probably would have continued to go down the same boring path had I not stayed behind to help clean up after the annual office Christmas party a few years ago. It was late as I made my way across the parking lot. Almost everybody had gone home. My car was at the far end of the lot, and I'd like to have parked closer to the building, but the spaces closest to the building are reserved for the higher-ups, and by the time I got to work the lot would be nearly full, forcing me to park near where you enter and exit the lot with the other stragglers. As I got ready to get into my car, I saw her. I didn't know it at the time, but this woman would be my wife. She was standing by the bus stop under the streetlight wearing a red wool coat and was looking worried as her long black hair blew in the wind. Maybe it was because I was feeling the holiday spirit, or maybe it was because of all the sappy Hallmark Christmas movies that I had been watching on television. Whatever the reason, I wound up saying those 3 words that are the reason that I'm writing this. Need some help? The woman turned to me and spoke. Yes. I've missed my bus and I don't know when the next one will come by. I asked her which bus she was waiting for and she responded, the C7 to Kingston Heights. Oh, that bus runs near my house, I said. I can give you a ride if you'd like. The woman thanked me and followed me then to my car. It was at this moment that I realized how tall and beautiful she was. She was quite tall, 6 feet 3 inches with long wavy black hair, bright green eyes, and a golden tan skin tone. As she got into my car, I asked her where she lived. The address she gave me was a few blocks away from my house. I punched in the address, my GPS, and we started off. As we drove, I decided to start to make small talk. So, do you work around here? I asked. The woman nodded. It turned out she worked at the same company as I did, but in a completely different department. I asked if she was at the Christmas party, and she said that she was. I didn't recall seeing her, though, but with so many people mingling around, I could understand why I wouldn't have. So, what's your name? I asked. And she told me Trina Lopez. Oh, I take it you're Hispanic. Half Hispanic, she said. My father is of Mexican descent, and my mother is of half African American and half Asian. She then continued. What about your side, mister? Smith, I replied. My name's Tom Smith. I'm mostly English with some Scottish and German. We continued to talk as we drove through the snowy evening. The more I talked to Trina, the more I got to like her. When I finally got to her house, I found myself asking her if she'd like to go out sometime. And to my amazement, she said yes. I gave her my cell phone number. Little did I know that my life would be forever changed from that point forward. Soon after we started dating, I met her cat, a black tabby aptly named Shadow, who quickly warmed up to me. After each date, I couldn't wait for the next. One Monday, I arrived at the office getting ready for another day of grueling work. I was surprised to see Trina. Trina, what are you doing here? I asked in surprise. Your department is 1 floor down, and Trina gave me a pouty look. Aren't you glad to see me? Of course, I said, but why are you up here? And then Trina smiled. I just got transferred to your department. Now, let me tell you, the way the company is set up, getting transferred to a different department is not impossible, but it is difficult, as the Human Resources Department has more involvement in the company than they should be allowed. In order to transfer, one would have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, go through an online application, and complete it with a cover letter and deal with a bunch of red tape. It's very difficult to do. The wait to process this can take up to a month and sometimes even 3 months at the most. Even the chances of getting your transfer request accepted are very little to none. I looked at her and said, well, how long did you have to wait? Trina smiled back at me and said just a few days. Upon hearing this, I was completely bewildered. A few days? Yeah, the process was a bit taxing, but it was worth it. Now we can see a lot more of each other, she said. Just then, my boss, Mr. G.B. Longfellow, came in the room. He was a short, skinny guy, around 5'4", and was in his mid-50s. He had gray hair with a widow's peak and thick glasses. For what he lacked in size, he made up with his voice, which sounded like it belonged to a much larger man. All of you slackers better quit jabbering around and get back to work. We have a lot of deadlines to make, so knock it off and look sharp, he barked. With that, he made his way into his office. Everybody, including Trina and myself, went back to our respective workstations. The workday went on as normal until after lunch. It was then I went to finish my project for an upcoming presentation. If all went well, I expected to get a promotion. I panicked when I couldn't find my thumb drive in my pocket, though. I was about to go look for it in the break room when Todd Faraday came up. Nobody liked Todd. Todd was a handsome, sandy-haired, smooth-talking sleazeball that couldn't be trusted. He seemed to get all the big breaks, even though no one saw him do much work at all. There was also a rumor that he was dating 3 different women, all of whom were very rich and wealthy, and that he was using them to help him finance a lavish lifestyle that he otherwise couldn't afford on his own. When I looked up at Todd, I was surprised to see he wasn't wearing the same "I'm so perfect" grin he always had on his face. Instead, his face seemed cold and emotionless, and he had a faraway look in his eyes, as if he were in a trance. He looked down at me and said in an almost robotic monotone voice, "I believe you left this in the break room." His words came out as if he was a space alien trying to sound like a normal human, but hadn't fully mastered human speech. He then reached into his pocket and stiffly pulled out my thumb drive, and I took it from him. "Thanks, Todd." Todd said nothing, but just stood there with the same blank expression on his face. "Are you feeling okay today?" I asked. "I feel fine," he said, and then stiffly walked away towards Longfellow's office. I watched him as he stopped just short of the door before he stiffly raised his arm, turned the knob, and walked in, closing the door behind him. A short while later, my co-workers and I heard Mr. Longfellow's voice booming from his office. He was obviously yelling at Todd. No one could make out what he was saying either, but it just sounded very angry. And just then, there was the sound of breaking glass. Several co-workers and I then burst into Longfellow's office and saw him staring out a broken window in his office looking very pale. "What happened?" asked a young red-haired woman in a dark blue pantsuit. Longfellow then turned with a sick look on his face. "Todd just came into my office and started confessing about how he cheated and lied his way to life success. I told him that he was fired and he had 15 minutes to clear out his desk. Todd then looked at me and said it wouldn't be necessary, and then he got up and jumped out the window." Everyone was shocked. There are 2 windows in Mr. Longfellow's office, and I managed to look out the unbroken window and recoiled in horror. Todd had jumped out and fell 8 stories to the ground and landed face first into the pavement. His skull had split open, spilling his brain and blood all over the concrete, and his limbs were bent at odd angles. The redhead who asked what happened also took a look and fainted into the arms of the middle-aged heavyset man behind her. Longfellow then ordered everybody out and gave everybody the rest of the day off. It was unbelievable. As I drove Trina home, I told her about what happened. "I can't figure it out," I said. "Just earlier, Todd was his usual self. I even saw him looking at epic fail videos online, laughing and remarking how stupid the people in the videos were when I was coming back from the bathroom." Trina then shrugged. "Well, maybe he finally grew a conscience and couldn't handle it." She suggested that the human brain is a mysterious thing when you think about it. I had to agree with her. That Friday came and everything had calmed down. Everybody seemed to forget about Todd and kind of started moving on. You didn't hear much chatter about it around the office. I had my presentation and it went better than I expected. The clients were extremely impressed, so impressed that they offered the company an exclusive 10-figure contract that could be renewed every 5 years after. Longfellow was ecstatic. This contract would prove very lucrative to the company and gave me the promotion plus a huge raise. That night after work, I took Trina out to eat at a fancy restaurant, an upscale French place called Gaston's Bistro, that I had passed by before but never entered. Trina and I walked well into the evening and enjoyed ourselves immensely. After dinner, Trina and I were walking to my car when a man stepped out from a dark alley and pulled a pistol out of his pocket. "All right, you two," he growled, pointing the pistol at us. "Hand over your money now and valuables and nobody gets hurt." I froze. We were standing under a streetlight, but there wasn't anybody else around. I happened to glance over at Trina and I swore her eyes seemed to glow a bright green. Just then the man's face went pale. He then lowered his gun and clutched his chest with his free hand and let out a low moan and then collapsed to the ground. I bent down in shock and checked his pulse. He was dead. I then called 911 on my cell phone and soon there were police officers and paramedics. The police took Trina and I's statement as the medics put the would-be robber's body in a bag and back into the ambulance. That night I kept thinking about what happened. In the end, I figured that the would-be robber simply had a weak heart and that it was just a coincidence, and that his heart happened to give out when he tried to rob Trina and me. Just a case of bad timing, I told myself. I then thought about how Trina's eyes seemed to glow for a brief moment. I figured it had to be my imagination, maybe a trick of the street light from a nearby lamp. Having been satisfied with my own conclusions, I put them out of my mind and fell asleep. Time went on and Trina and I continued to date. And one day, I proposed to her. She, of course, said yes. We had a lovely outdoor wedding at a mountain resort and went to Barbados for our honeymoon. When it came to where we were to live, it was at her place. After all, she owned it. I paid off my lease, and when we got back from our honeymoon, we started the process of moving me into her house. Her house was an elegant two-story craftsman house, most likely built in the early 1960s. It was painted a deep red with white shutters and trim. While I was moving some of my stuff into the basement, I noticed an old book cabinet. And when I say old, I mean ancient. This thing was made of dark wood and had carved figures that looked to be African. "What's that?" I asked. "Oh, that's just an old family heirloom," she said. "It belonged to my great-grandmother. She brought it with her when she and my great-grandfather immigrated to the United States from Haiti in the late 1930s. "Oh, okay. Does it open?" No, it doesn't. It needs a key, and the key was lost years ago," she said. I then asked her if there was anything in it and pressed her on it. Her reply was just some old books and nothing too interesting. A few years passed for Trina and I, and my life continued to improve as the days and weeks wore on. I soon traded my boring sedan for a flashy yellow sports car, one of them European jobs, and my career was taking off like a rocket. One lovely day in the late spring, Trina and I were on our back porch reading. Shadow, our cat, was ambling around the backyard when the neighbor's dog Fifi, a large standard poodle, came out. Fifi was known to hate cats with a passion, something that was brought up with his owner, Shirley Olmsted, but she never did anything about it. Shirley was your all-too-typical Karen, bossy, loud, and self-entitled. She thought that she was the queen of the neighborhood and probably that the sun didn't rise or set without her say-so. As soon as Fifi laid eyes on Shadow, she started barking viciously at him from behind his side of the fence. Shadow responded in kind by arching his back and hissing like he was possessed. I happened to look over at Trina and I swore I saw a bright light flash in her eyes again, and it looked to be green. But again, I just passed it off as my imagination. Shirley then came out as Trina went over to fetch Shadow. I knew the sparks would start flying once the two got into it, so I picked up my book and then went inside. Things were tense in the house that day, and later that night Trina and I ate dinner in silence. I knew that she was still fuming after her latest encounter with Shirley, so I let her have a little bit of space. The next morning, Trina was in a much better mood. It was as if yesterday's altercation never even happened. I had just finished my breakfast when I heard a scream coming from Olmsted's house next door. I ran over and saw Shirley standing in her backyard looking over something. "What's wrong?" I asked as I came around the side of her house. "It's terrible," Shirley cried, tears running down her cheeks, leaving black marks of mascara all down her face. "I left my dog outside last night. When we got up this morning to let her in, this is what we saw." I looked down and soon vomited my breakfast all over the place. The dog had been turned inside out. Her organs, muscle tissue, bones, and everything else were completely exposed. There were blood and guts everywhere. I then looked over the fence and I saw Trina peeking her head out of our back door with a satisfied smirk on her face. I was completely stunned at the scene. A few days later, Trina had to go to a doctor's appointment and I was left alone. I was really unsettled about what was going on, and I decided that I needed to get to the bottom of things. I went into the basement and straight to the cabinet. The thing was shut tight just like it was before, but after a few jiggles of the handle, it finally opened. That's odd, I thought. I thought this needed a key to be opened. I gazed in, and sure enough, there were old books in there. They looked like they hadn't been used in a long time, and I picked one off the shelves and wiped the dust off the cover. When I looked at the cover, I knew my suspicions were confirmed. The book was titled Witchcraft of the Dark Continents. I looked through it and saw that it was full of ancient spells and tips on becoming and being a witch. Then I picked up another one. This one was titled Haitian Voodoo and Hoodoo. There were a few others as well, so I gathered them all, took them upstairs to the living room, and I waited. It was around 2:30 when Trina came home from the doctor. When I held up one of the books, she said, "How did you get that?" in total surprise. "The cabinet wasn't as locked as you said it was," I said in a cold tone. "So now you know my secret then," Trina replied in a nonchalant way. "Indeed, all this time I was married to a witch," I said through gritted teeth. Trina put her hands on her hips, the same hips that swayed gently side to side whenever she walked. "So, Tom, what are you going to do about it?" she said, looking defiant. I stood up and looked her dead in the eye. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop you. I don't know how I am, but I am." Just then, Trina's great eyes flashed and I was overcome by a sharp pain in my chest. I fell to the floor, clutching my chest and gasping for air. "You'll do no such thing, Thomas Smith," she said, and she smiled with an evil look in her face. "You see, my great-grandmother was forced to leave Haiti because of her witchcraft. When my grandmother was growing up, she was taught the same stuff by my great-grandmother. However, my mother never showed interest in it, but I did. So my grandmother taught me instead." Trina explained her history as I lay there on the floor, gasping for air as she went on. "You're probably figuring out the true cause of your success, the promotions, the good fortune, all because of me," she said with a wide smile. I gulped some air before managing to speak. "Then you're the reason why Todd was acting so strange when he died, how your transfer went through so quickly, why that robber was snuffed out, and that's how Sherry's dog got mutilated," I managed to croak out. "Bingo." Trina then nodded. "But why?" I gasped. "Because I love you," she said. "I've loved you ever since I saw you across the room at the Christmas party all those years ago. But if you want out," her voice then became stern and her face got hard, "I can make it happen." I thought about it for a few seconds before managing to croak out, "Okay, you win. Now please help me." Trina's eyes flashed again, and like that the pain stopped and I could breathe normally. As I got to my feet, Trina dipped back into her loving demeanor and sat next to me on my couch. "You made a smart choice to stay," she said in a sweet voice. "It would be a shame for you to miss out on your surprise." I gulped. "What surprise?" Trina then smiled again. "I'm pregnant. You're gonna be a daddy."